This is what guides us, and this is what shows that it's impossible for there to be a religious persecution that can be supported in any way, shape, or form by the government of Nigeria.
Now, Nigeria dismisses U.S. President Donald Trump's claims that the government is allowing the killings of Christians. Trump is threatening military action against the country, as well as a cut of all American aid. Nigeria is home to more than 230 million people and is Africa's most populous country. It's roughly split between a majority Muslims and a largely Christian South, but it's facing various security crises across the country. So let's take a look at who is behind the attacks and why. Now, Boko Haram armed group and its splinter group, Daesh West Africa Province, or ISWAP, have been linked to deadly attacks in the northeast of Nigeria, which has a Muslim majority. They're opposed to secular authority and education and target civilians and security forces in Borno, Yobe, and Adamawa states. While village raids and kidnappings for ransom in northwest Nigeria have been linked to criminal gangs and armed bandits. In the north-central states or middle belt, clashes between mostly Muslim Fulani herders and Christian farmers are often painted as ethnic or religious, but analysts say climate change and competition over land and water trigger vigilante raids and extrajudicial killings. Nigerian officials admit there's a security problem, but they deny reports that there's a deliberate systematic attack on Christians. For example, an International Society for Civil Liberties and Rule of Law, or Inter-Societies, August report claims that 100,000 Christians in Nigeria have been killed since 2009, in addition to 60,000 Muslims. But data from ACLED, an NGO that monitors violence in West Africa, shows that nearly 53,000 Muslims and Christians civilians have been reported killed in the same time frame. Samson Omale finds out what is the reality on the ground and brings us this report.
This is a mass burial in Haipang, a Christian community in Plateau State. At least 13 people were killed in October in a coordinated attack. It's one of several such burials this year. A report by the International Society for Civil Liberties and the Rule of Law claims that more than 7,000 Christians were killed in Nigeria in the first 220 days of 2025 by Boko Haram and Fulani herdsmen.
I agree that the violence against Christians in Plateau and in Nigeria as a whole is targeted and is deliberate. And my reasons are, once, if you go communities that have been attacked, go to those communities. Some of these communities are being occupied by the attackers themselves.
But government officials deny that there is a deliberate, systematic attack on Christians, calling it inaccurate and harmful. Senator Suleiman Kawu from northwestern Nigeria agrees, saying Muslims are also frequent targets of deadly attacks.
I have 50 places where militia or non-state actors attack Muslim when they are observing religious activities. 50, it is here, sir.
Community leaders are warning that Trump's remarks could worsen religious tensions in a country where there's almost an equal number of Muslims and Christians.
I think there is a sinister motive to kill this interface and this collaboration between the Muslims and the Christians in this country.
Armed groups such as Boko Haram and Daesh West Africa have terrorized northern and central Nigeria for more than a decade. The military remains stretched thin, fighting banditry, kidnappings, and farmer-herder attacks across the country.
Professor Onje Giwado is a lecturer and was once kidnapped himself. He says the genocide debate exposes the government's failure to protect citizens.
Just that we are not being responsive we are not acting consistent with our constitution, that the security and welfare of the people is the primary responsibility of governance.
As Nigeria faces global scrutiny on, let's say, the violence cuts across all faiths. Samsi Omale, Africa Matters, Jos, Nigeria.
Let's hear more from Ovigwe Egu. He is a policy advisor at Development Reimagined and joins us from Toronto in Canada. Thank you for joining us here on Africa Matters. So is Christianity facing an existential threat in Nigeria, as Trump claims, and what's the reality on the ground?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I think it's important to provide a little bit of contextual understanding given what Mr. Trump has said regarding Nigeria. So for about 2 decades now, we've had problems with terrorist groups. And very recently, in the last 5 years, another set of insurgents in the Middle Belt and also in North Central Nigeria. So there is a lot of violence in Nigeria, but this violence affects all communities, Christians, Muslims, and even those who are irreligious. That is because, in many ways, the violence we've seen in Nigeria, it's tied not only to ideology with Boko Haram, but also with resource control. So you must have heard of issues of farmer-header clashes in the Middle Belt of Nigeria, states like Benue State, but also very recently insurgent groups and bandits in the northwest, north central, and that's about a lot of it has to do with resources in the mining sector. So when we hear of genocide accusation from Trump, I think that is a huge mischaracterization of the situation on the ground.
Mm-hmm. And just from what you're explaining, then one would wonder, how has the Nigerian government, responded to the killings? And is there a risk, from where you're sitting, is there a risk that these attacks could, go ahead and deepen divisions within a community or communities rather, or even religious groups?
Yeah, so what the Nigerian government is trying to do, given certain statements that have come out, is that they are trying to make the case that there is no genocide in Nigeria. Even Nigerians themselves, even from the Christian communities, are not using that term because it's a very loaded and powerful statement to make. Accusing a country of genocide when that does not exist in the vocabulary of the citizen of the country we're talking about. So the Nigerian government has made effort to try to bring the US's attention to the reality on the ground, as opposed to blanket statement and narrative that do not reflect the reality.
Okay.
But let's talking about communities. There are communities in the country have been affected by violence. Christians have faced some violence. Muslims are also facing violence. So the violence does not discriminate along faith. That's not to say, like I said, there's no violence, but it just isn't right to characterize it as a genocide.
Okay, so it's good you're saying that the Nigerian government has done a lot to bring this to an end, but why does Nigeria continue to struggle with chronic insecurity and attacks by armed groups?
So what the Nigerian government has done with terrorism, with insurgency and banditry, has really focused on kinetic solutions. So using force, they've increased weapons, they've increased some training and training collaborations. But what is really missing is, even from the security perspective, is that we still have a very low officers to population ratio, particularly even in policing, because policing is the first line of security in communities. So Nigeria, for instance, has 170 police officers to 100,000 people. That is way below the UN average of 222 officers to 100,000 people. So what happens is that the government has to supplement policemen with the army. And the army is already stretched thin because it is fighting Boko Haram in the northeast. It is also not being involved in community policing or community security work as it were. And that's a lot of pressure on the army. But beyond that, I think the government is not doing enough in terms of looking at this problem from a social and economic perspective. So just trying to use force to stamp out ideology, it's not going to be enough, because primarily, like I said, where this issue has to do with resources, it's about livelihood, right? So if there's enough investment into regularizing and formalizing these mining resources to create proper jobs, build schools, healthcare centers, hospitals, and educate the population before 15 years, we're probably going to solve most of this problem, because it's really tied to poverty and a lack of means in this area. Nigeria, for instance, has 20 million children out of school, according to UNESCO. That is very, very high. 10 years ago, rather, it was about 15 million. So you can see it's a pacing threat when it comes to security, when you have this much people out of school.
All right. So with all that said, then, one can wonder how can the U.S. help Nigeria in its fight against armed groups?
Yeah, of course, Nigeria has said that it is open to collaboration with the U.S., but I think it needs to be emphasized that Nigeria's sovereignty must be respected, because it's a sovereign country. It has been independent for many decades now. It has a standing army that is doing what it's expected to do, even though it needs to do more. And if the United States think there is a genocide in Nigeria, there are protocols to this. You can't just threaten to bomb another country because it's in the genocide. South Africa did not threaten to bomb Israel. It went through a process, because there's a process in international diplomacy to deal with this issue. The US should present its case before the ICC, perhaps even go through the UNG, let the whole of the world look at the situation and say, okay, yes, and then refer the case to the ICC, and then the ICC can begin proceedings. It's not about intervention. What Nigeria needs from the United States is strategic investment, not war plan.
And now this is President Donald Trump saying that I will deploy the U.S. troops either through airstrikes or, on the ground. So what does it really indicate between the partnership that the two countries have?
Yeah, I think the partnership is at a point where there needs to be super reflection, because when you have a partner who you've relied on for many years for training, for intelligence, and all of that, when that partner suddenly wakes up to accuse you of genocide and threatens to bomb you, I think you then have to really reflect on what exactly has that partnership been about, and what is going to be the future of that partnership. You mentioned the 1.5 billion. Yes, of course, that is significant. Nigeria gets a lot of heavy weapons and even some small and light weapons from the United States. But at the same time, it's also expanding that partnership portfolio. For many weapon components now, it is looking towards other partners. But I think it still wants to work with the US, and President Trump maybe is looking to even expand. And this is part of his strategy to try to raise pressure on the Nigerian side to get them to agree to some of his proposals. We've seen him do this with South Africa. We've seen him do this with the DRC and countries around the world. So using escalatory statement as a pressure tactic when a negotiation is around the corner.
All right. And as we wind up in a minute, Trump claims there is a genocide in Nigeria and South Africa. Now, this is based on flawed reports. So what can African governments do to counter such false narratives that influence U.S. policy?
I think first and foremost, they really have to take more action to solve their domestic problem, because if the problems were not there in the first place, security problems in this regard, there won't be an avenue or opportunity for this type of accusation. That said, the problem I'm talking about is not a problem of genocide. So that is a different thing entirely. But when governments are more responsible and responsive to the needs of their citizens, there is little wiggle room for such accusation. Now, when we're looking at the United States current government, it has come up with a lot of accusation on countries on the continent, and I think these leaders have done a lot to try to resolve this. So in the DRC, we've seen peace agreements, even though they see problems. But with South Africa, of course, they didn't have any evidence. And I think with Nigeria as well, too, there's really is no evidence of a genocide. What needs to be done is that these countries need to make their positions very clear, stand firm on the sovereignty, that they've been trusted to protect by their citizens and ensure that they're getting good deals for their country.
All right. Thank you so much, Ovigwe Egu Development Reimagined Policy Advisor. Thank you for your time here on Africa Matters. Still to come here on Africa Matters.
Many disabled struggle with inclusivity in African society. I am Darren Alan Cheune at a stadium in central Uganda where the visually impaired are nurturing dreams through blind football.
Mali's capital, Bamako, is under economic siege by the Al-Qaeda-linked group JNIM. Now, truck drivers risk their lives daily to deliver vital fuel, defying the campaign aimed at choking the ruling junta. Grace Kuria-Kanja reports.
These truck drivers along the Mali-Ivory Coast border do not want to show their faces for security reasons, and they are too nervous to enjoy their meal. It may be their last.
You never know if you'll come back alive. Only God knows. If God saves you, so much the better.
They're transporting desperately needed fuel into landlocked Mali, something the Al-Qaeda-affiliated armed group Jamaat Nusrat al-Islam wal Muslimin, or JNIM, banned in September. Mali's military government had limited fuel supplies in remote areas to try and cripple militant groups. JNIM has since targeted hundreds of fuel tankers, often banning them and killing the driver. Bala was one of the lucky ones.
Since the beginning of the blockade, I encountered them once, but they didn't harm me. My truck had broken down and I was on my way to park it. On the road, they had burned down 2 tankers. The drivers died. This was near Sikasso, but they didn't harm me. They asked me to divert and continue on my way.
Mali has faced an armed insurgency for nearly 10 years, and JNIM has been carrying out deadly attacks in Burkina Faso, Niger, Ghana, Ivory Coast, Benin and Togo since they formed in 2017. In September 2024, JNIM killed dozens of police officers and banned the presidential jet in Mali's capital. A year later, they continue to attack military convoys, and Mali's military junta leader is calling on civilians to do their bit as well.
Those who are used to going out 10 times a day with their cars or motorcycles must now understand that we are in a difficult period. There is not enough fuel and we must reduce our trips. Unnecessary trips must be avoided. Everyone must therefore find solutions within their own families.
Blocking fuel trucks is an attempt by JNIM to strangle Mali's economy and turn the public against the authorities. But the truck drivers say they are devoted to their work. Grace Kuria-Kanja, Africa Matters.
It is difficult to imagine life for a disabled person in a war-torn country like South Sudan. But blind football is uniquely nurturing dreams of visually impaired players from this East African nation. Darren Alan Cheyune witnessed their 3-0 win against neighboring Uganda, bringing them closer to their Paralympics dream.
Martin Lado was born without sight because of a medical condition. The 23-year-old is South Sudan's first blind footballer, and he led his country at their first continental tournament in Uganda's capital, Kampala.
I was still young. People mocking me, giving me mockery because they would put a stone in front of me, telling me to kick the ball. This is the ball, and I end up kicking the stone. I was being through a lot of challenges when I was growing on. Then when I heard that there was blind football, I joined it. Then I put all my heart, all my strength, all my energy on it.
Adapted from futsal, blind football is at a developing stage in Africa. Played over 2 halves of 20 minutes each, 4 outfield players are visually impaired, while the goalkeeper can see.
People shout or direct them using their voices. And then also we have sound when they are playing, sounding the ball. And then another thing is when they are guiding, like kicking the ball, taking penalties, we come and bang on the posts. They know this is the right, this is the left ball, this is the center. And that's how it is organized. So sound is very important because we use it as our eyes.
Every team in blind football has a guide placed at the back of the opponent's goal. This person can see and offers instructions on movement and how to use the ball, but when players reach the final third of the pitch, the team in defense is on its own. South Sudan is the world's youngest country, but its population has lived in conflict with a persistent humanitarian crisis. With help from Light for the World International, blind football began in 2020, and it's more than just kicking the ball.
It also promotes independence. These players come from their houses alone, without nobody coming with them. So also it promotes leadership. Every time when we are training, we give chance to everybody to be able to lead the training session. We also invite volunteers from different places to come and attend with us training, of which they are able to be exposed to a lot of people. They make new friends.
Martin now hopes to complete his university degree soon and lead his team out for the gold quest at the 2028 Paralympics in the USA. Darren Alancheyune, Africa Matters, Kampala.
Some communities in Kenya, especially those living near areas with vast rare earth mineral reserves. Now, they worry that officials will try to maximize profit at their cost. This comes as countries try to secure as much as they can for their technological development. Yunus Demiroglu has the story from Kenya.
Most people would be excited at the prospect of buried treasure, but the vast amount of rare earth minerals right under the feet of these Kenyans in Mlima Hill have left them feeling uneasy. Kenya's mining industry has been largely at a standstill as the government tries to tackle corruption and poor regulation, leading to a 2019 government ban on new mining licenses. But the demand for rare earth minerals, coupled with Kenya's vast reserves, has shifted government policies to attract investors.
The government at this time sat down and thought about the fact that there are a lot of government resources here, which the citizens here cannot benefit from until the government is involved. We as Mlima residents have not refused, neither have we accepted. However, the question is, what are the good things that will benefit the residents of Mlima? Since the government has decided it wants to explore its resources, what are the procedures being followed?
Residents say they've been turning away foreigners looking to survey the land, including Chinese nationals. That's because there's been a lack of transparency with prospective investors in the past. Government data shows that half of the Digo ethnic group, who have been living in these lands for over half a millennia and compose most of its population, are living in extreme poverty. Domitila says they want that to change.
I hear there are valuable minerals here, which could sustain the entire country of Kenya, worth trillions of shillings. Why should we suffer? If there are valuable minerals, we are not opposed to the mountain being mined. Let them come in a good way, let us talk, let them give us money so that we too can live a different life and change our lives.
If the mining is to happen and when it begins, let them not seek labor from elsewhere. They should consider the residents here.
In 2013, Quartech Mining in Kenya estimated the rare earth deposits in Mlima Hill could be worth up to $62.4 billion. But prices have skyrocketed as Europe and the US have increased demand, and as China, the world's largest source of rare earth minerals, has limited exports. The US has been aiming to increase its imports from Africa, including by brokering a peace deal in the mineral-rich DRC. And a visit by the US ambassador to Kenya to Mlima Hill back in June shows that Kenya is on their radar as well. What's clear is the public, the government, and investors all want these minerals out of the ground. The question is how the government will balance the benefits among all three. Yunus Demiroglu, Africa Matters.
That's our show this week. Share your thoughts and suggestions about the U.S. threat of military action in Nigeria and what can be done about it. Leave your comments on our Africa Matters YouTube page or on X. Thanks for watching, and it's goodbye from me, Brenda Zeda Radido.